difficult to be proved as such. There is another article which is the Article 18C of GATT 1994, and this article pertains to the governmental assistance for economic development. We'll come that later. And probably the most of the solutions of our industry are in these safeguard measures or the governmental assistance for economic development. Now, the type of trade protections we talked were basically anti-dumping, countervailing, which we have yet to cover. We've got safeguards in case of increased imports and for economic development. Now, the history is that the present text of Article 18 was agreed basically in 1954 and 55, and later a review session, some of the clauses were entered into, and it was entered into effect on 7th of October 1957. Now, these dates are not important because they are not significant dates, or they don't have as such any significance, so we'll not be talking about that in our paper, the question paper. And the principal source concerning the drafting of the Article 18C is the report on the review of the Review Working Party on Quantitative Restrictions. So this is a little history, but we'll try to see what the main agreement is. Now, the basic thing is that the GATT rules recognize that any developing country, in order to, number one, in order to achieve the objectives of the WTO. Now, what are the objectives of the WTO? Number one, to raise standards of living. Number two, to afford full employment. And number three, to enable the industry to use full resources available within the country. And those resources are land, labor, capital, raw material, minerals, and other things. Or to pursue the policies of economic development while in order to achieve these two things. Number one, the achievement of the objectives of the WTO. Number two, the policies of economic development. A country may need to protect its domestic industry. Now, the difference here is we are not talking of increased imports. We are not talking of unfair trade, that is reduced prices on account of dumping or on account of subsidy. What we are talking is basically that the government of a developing country, obviously a WTO member country, may need to grant additional protection, additional coverage, additional benefits to its industry while or keeping in view, number one, the achievement of the objectives of the WTO, and number two, for the economic development of a particular sector. And while doing so, what it can do, it can protect the new or infant industry, or for the further development of the existing industries. Now, the WTO law is silent on the account that what is a new and infant industry. It has not been defined under law that what is meant by new or infant industry. But if we try to discuss it in the class, how would you react to an infant industry? What would be an infant industry?
An industry probably that not very old industry, like not having much roots.
So the making parts of maybe CNG kits or CNG items because it is just not introduced now in the market. Some industry making some new parts and kits. It has just been established.
For example, so maybe it can be defined in terms of the period, maybe after the establishment of particular industry, maybe 4 or 5 years. It
might be even the turnover in the industry.
So I think this is the initiation of any industry that is taking root in that country. That would be the.
What do you mean by root?
Just initiation of that industry, just like for example.
Introduction of new industry in any country, which is just entering in any country. It was not previously established in that country, but just establishing from start or from beginning.
Anything?
कुछ अर्सा पहले पाकिस्तान में, अभी तक पाकिस्तान में जितनी सेमीकंडक्टर चिप्स वगैरह आ रही सारी इंपोर्ट ही होगी। कुछ अर्सा पहले एक इंडस्ट्री, एक फैक्ट्री लगी थी पाकिस्तान के अंदर, जो कि पाकिस्तान में ये सिलिकॉन चिप्स बना रही थी, और उसके बंद होने चाहिए। लेकिन वो जो पीरियड था वो जब सेट हुई, मार्केट पाकिस्तान में बनाने के अगेंस्ट इम्पोर्ट्स जो हो रही थी, और उसको पाकिस्तान की तरफ अपना कदम जमाने के लिए जो जितना टाइम लगता है until कि वो मैच्योर हो जाए पाकिस्तान में एक मार्केट शेयर बनाना।
What is maturity?
सर मैच्योर मतलब मैच्योर ये कि अपनी रिकग्निशन इन द डोमेस्टिक इंडस्ट्री वो बना ले।
Any industry which has been installed for the first to respect this product.
Basically, is introducing a new product in a market and trying to have a good market share.
I guess somehow also related to the industry which don't have very clear policies as well.
So, all of you have tried to contribute to it, and a little contribution I would also like to make. All of whatever you have said is not wrong, but that needs to be said in a proper framework. Now, new and infant industry is like an infant. It gets up, falls down, then at stage come he experiences everything, and then he is able to move without any assistance, without any help. And what makes it do like that? Experience. And how do you get experience? By research and development. So it all depends that how the industry has come up, and is it able to withstand the international pressures, the domestic pressures. As such, the definition of infant or new industry has not been given into in the law. But infant and new industry means any industry which cannot withstand the pressures, market forces, foreign competition. It has not taken the technological advancements which the other countries have. It's still an infant industry without experiencing, without having much of research and development. So these are some of the definitions. Yes. Services industry ko? Yes, services is an infant industry. IT is definitely an infant thing. For instance, I'll quote you an example. Like, if you are familiar with soda ash, so the plant of soda ash in Pakistan was put up pre-partition, and that was sometime in 44. Now, so the ICI had a plant in Kyoda for developing or producing soda ash. Now that industry is there, and now there is another industry, there is another unit which has come up and started manufacturing soda ash in Pakistan. Now what happened was that the government, considering the fact that the industry is quite an old and mature industry, having taken all the research and development and taking also expanded its capacities, so the government reduced the duties from 20% to 10% in the instant budget. Now, do you think that the unit which has been set up recently is an infant industry or not?
Yes. Because new experiences, new environment makes
No, it's not, because we are talking of the industry, we are not talking of the industrial unit. So it's the industry that matters. And for the further development of the existing units. Now, if there is a unit in Pakistan, you want to expand it, and we'll try to see in what circumstances the government can give additional protection to the domestic industry within the framework of the WTO laws and provisions. Next. Now, forms and assistance of protection, it may take the form of safeguard action restricting imports for a temporary periods to enable to maintain sufficient flexibility in their tariff structure and to apply quantitative restrictions. Now, there are two things. Number one, that they may take the form of safeguard measures. As such, the concept of duration, as we saw in safeguard measures in case of increased imports, we saw that you can have a maximum of 8 years for developed countries and 10 years for developing countries, and you could have a equal, you should, I mean, it was mandatory to have a non-applicability period of equal duration, referring to the first imposition of safeguard measures. But In this safeguard measure, there is no such condition, and it is quite flexible. And it says that the safeguard actions restricting imports for temporary periods to enable them to maintain sufficient flexibility in their tariff structure. Now, what is meant by sufficient flexibility in the tariff structure? That you can easily maneuver the modification of the schedule, or you can raise the tariffs freely. So this is what it means. And then you can apply quantitative restrictions. It permits that you even impose quantitative restrictions, quotas, or even stop the imports, but again based on a certain case. Safeguard provisions permits taking following measures affecting imports. If government assistance is required to the establishment of a particular industry, take protective measures or other measures, that is non-tariff measures, and such measures are justified insofar as they are to facilitate the attainment of the objectives of the WTO. But again, could you please